Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Torah Talk Weekly Parsha with our wonderfully awesome Rabbi Rafi Mollot. I keep wanting to say awesome Rabbi Rafi Mollot, double conundrum there, whatever. So welcome back, Rabbi. How are you today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Running a few minutes behind. I apologize. Thank you for being patient with me there. But doing great. Glad you're here. Sorry we missed you last week. I know it is really scheduling sometimes is quite complicated, especially for live shows. And so I'm very, very happy to have you back this week, Rabbi.
Glad to be back. I hope we can make up some lost ground.
Yay. Looking forward to it. All right, well, I'm going to turn this over to you right away and let you do your thing. Why is I got one of my things missing here? Let's see if it'll actually show up right. Hey, it did. Okay, cool. It came up blank on my side. My computer's acting weird today, so I'm glad it's holding up for now. So, Rabbi Rafi Mollot, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
All right, all is forgiven. In the words of Salieri, I absolve you. Anyway, for those who know what that's a reference to. Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parsha's Bo, and it's the continuation of the story of the Exodus. Last week, which is the week that we missed, is the bulk of the 10 plagues between last week's Parsha, Va'era, and this week's Parsha, Bo. We have the totality of the 10 plagues. 7 of them in last week's Parsha, and 3 of them in this week's Parsha. Now, there's a very Kabbalistic reason for the division between those two, but this is not a Kabbalah class. We're not going to go into the whole issue of the Sefirot, the 10 Sefirot. There are 7 lower Sefirot and 3 upper Sefirot. We're not going to go into that, but it's an interesting division. There's also a cutesy I think I just lost one of my lights, William. I think the one of my lights went out. Am I?
You're still fine.
Am I still visible?
You're still perfectly fine.
Okay, great.
Yay.
Wasn't prepared for that. Okay, so there's a cutesy thing that people say about Parsha's Bo, that the Hebrew word Bo, spelled Bet Aleph, Bet being the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and Aleph being the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And since every Hebrew letter corresponds to a number, for those of you who are familiar with the concept of gematria, the Hebrew numerology, so the first letter Aleph is the number 1, and the second letter Bet is the number 2. So this word Bo is comprised of a 2 and a 1, which collectively equals 3. For you mathematicians out there. So people point to the fact that this Parsha that includes 3 of the plagues has a name which numbers 3. Isn't that cute? I'm not really sure what to make of that, but it's often tossed around, so I figured I would say it. Last week's Parsha, the title doesn't equal up to 7, so, not sure what to do with that. But in any case, we have the last 3 and the first 7 last week, the last 3 this week. And then finally, of course, after the 10 plagues, we have the nation of Israel, the children of Israel are finally released. And during all this, while all this is happening, God is teaching Moses laws. And he's telling Moshe to teach these laws to the Jewish people. Laws regarding, for example, the Paschal sacrifice, the Paschal lamb. Now, I know like the Paschal lamb gets Christians very excited, but it's so silly because it has nothing to do with atonement, and they make a whole thing out of this. And you read about the Paschal lamb in context. There's not a word here about atonement whatsoever. There's just no relationship between this commandment and what they want to turn it into, unless you don't know anything. Sorry, no offense, but I'm talking about it, and I'm like, as I'm saying it, I'm saying trigger words here. But like, please, let's be normal. So there's the commandment for the Paschal lamb. The children of Israel have to slaughter this animal, this creature, which was a deity for the Egyptians, to show their fealty to God and their lack of fear of retribution from the Egyptians and their total reliance upon God. And this would kind of be like their exit ticket, that if they'll slaughter the animal and place the blood on the doorpost and consume the sacrifice that night, the night of the plague of the firstborn, the Jews will be spared. God will, so to speak, pass over the Jewish houses, which is the Hebrew word Pesach, to pass over, hence the festival of Pesach or Passover. Now, I didn't plan to say this, but now that I'm talking about it, it's very interesting that we call the festival of Passover, and actually in the Torah, it's known as the festival of Matzos, Chag HaMatzos, the festival of unleavened bread. But you'll never hear a Jew saying, "Oh, what holiday is coming up?" "Oh, Matzos." And you'll never hear a Jew say that. It's always Pesach. The Torah calls the festival of Sukkot, the tabernacles where we dwell in these temporary huts for 7 days or 8 days outside of Israel. It's called Sukkot in the Torah, and we call it Sukkot. Shavuot, the festival, so to speak, of weeks. It's called in the Torah Shavuot, and we call it Shavuot. But when it comes to Chag HaMatzot, when these three appear together, it's Chag HaMatzot, the festival of matzah, unleavened bread, Chag Shavuot, the festival of weeks, and Chag HaSukkot, the festival of tabernacles. And of all those names, we Jewish people call all of them what they are, except for matzot. No one ever calls Passover the holiday of unleavened bread, Chag HaMatzos. Why? That's what the Torah calls it. Why? I didn't plan to talk about this, but it's worthwhile saying. There's an interesting idea that in this formative event where God is pulling the children of Israel out of Egypt, a nation from within another nation, as we'll see, like a newborn child out of its mother's womb. There's this new creation happening. It's a recreation of the world, the Exodus story. And that's, for those who know, there's a Talmudic dispute whether the world was created in the Hebrew month of Tishrei, which is in the fall, or the Hebrew month of Nisan, which is in the spring. The festival of Passover is in the spring. We celebrate Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, in the fall, pretty much. So, but it's actually a dispute when the creation was. When was the beginning of the world? So there are those who reconcile this dispute by saying even the opinion that it was, so to speak, in the spring doesn't mean that they dispute that the world was created in Tishrei, in that fall month, which we celebrate as Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. But rather, since the world had ceased to recognize God as its creator, that knowledge was totally lost. But only, as we're going to see in this class, as I hope the topic of the class will be, only through the events of the Exodus did the knowledge once again emerge to the world that there is a creator and the identity of that creator. And bringing that awareness to the world was, so to speak, a reenactment of creation, because it brought back the concept of creation. So there was a new concept that came into the world that had been lacking because it had fallen into this idolatrous pattern, which was the concept of creation and creator. So with the events of the Exodus, that now the creator becomes known once again, that's the true meaning of the one who said the creation was in Nisan, because for all practical purposes, that's when the knowledge of creation came to be. So that's when we acknowledge the creation, when the knowledge became known. But in any event, so at the inception of this relationship and this new transformation, it's the whole book of the Song of Songs is a love song between God and the Jewish people. The male character in the Song of Songs represents God, and the female character represents Israel, and they sing and praise each other, and they pledge their love to one another through many, many poetic passages. I have an entire series, shameless plug, I have an entire series on the Song of Songs, which is on my channel, Rabbi Rafi Mollot. And it's a fascinating series for those who want to do a deep dive. I'll try to do a quick justice over here. But we Jews have a custom of reading the book of Song of Songs on the festival of Passover, because as the poetic description of the relationship between the people of Israel and God, that comes into being with the Exodus, because that's when our nation was born. Like I said, we were a family, we were a small family that came down to Egypt, and then we multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, but we weren't, so to speak, distinct from Egypt, because we were sort of a sub-demographic within another nation, and God pulled us out of there. We were birthed, we were born one nation from amidst another. When we achieved our freedom, our independence, we became the nation of Israel, the independent nation of Israel, our own unique entity. So this being called the nation of Israel came into the world scene with the Exodus, and hence the beginning of this love partnership between God and his nation. So when we describe the festival that marks this event, each love partner is looking lovingly at their partner and acknowledging their contribution. And God looks at the people and says, look how beautiful this people. What did they do? They baked unleavened bread. They had faith in me. They baked the unleavened breads the night of the plague of the firstborn. They sat in their homes and they ate this unleavened bread, and they left to join me in the desert in such a hurry that the bread didn't rise, etc., etc. God is looking at the actions of the Jewish people, and he's celebrating from his perspective. This is the festival of matzahs, because that was the product of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are looking at their love partner. They're looking at God, and they're saying, look at this beautiful God, what he did for us when he plagued the Egyptians and slew the firstborn in every Egyptian home. He passed over our houses. He spared us at that time of great cataclysm. We were spared. We were shown God's mercy. He passed over us. This is our festival when we celebrate God's actions. So we call it the festival of Passover, colloquially, and God calls it the festival of unleavened bread. He's looking at us and we're looking at him. Two loving partners in love with each other. They each put the focus on one another. It's a beautiful idea. But as this is occurring, like I said, God is giving laws. He tells Moshe, this month is for you the first of months. We have a new calendar. We have a new system of rendering time that's unique to the Jewish people and separates us from the timekeeping systems that were in the past. We are starting our new year. We're starting a new enterprise. The Jewish nation is born. This month is for you, the month of Nisan, the first of months. It's a beginning point of this relationship between us and God on a national level. And he commands us the Paschal Lamb, and he commands us the unleavened bread, and he commands us the redeeming of the firstborn, and he commands us the phylacteries, the wearing of the phylacteries, where we bind certain portions of the Torah in leather boxes onto our arm, the details of which are mainly found in the oral tradition. However, the commandment to bind certain words as a sign upon our hand, which means the arm, and between the eyes, which is a position on the head above the line between the eyes. And again, how to construct it is not found in the text. It's only known through Torah Shabbat Peh, oral tradition. But these commandments are all found in this Parsha, and it's an interesting thing because we haven't gotten the Torah yet. We're going to come soon to Sinai. We're going to stand at Sinai and receive the Torah, and that's where essentially the 613 commandments, as it were, are going to become binding on the Jewish people. And yet we find in this Parsha already we're getting commandments. And through the book of Genesis, there's only 3 commandments in the entire book, one of which was commanded to Adam to be fruitful and multiply. Then we had the commandment of circumcision, which was specific for Abraham and his seed. And then we have the commandment of refraining from eating the sciatic nerve of an animal to remember the conflict between Jacob and the angel, that he struck him in his thigh, and we refrain from consuming that part of an animal to remember. And it says, these things are specific to the children of Israel. But other than that, other than those 3 commandments that we find in the book of Genesis, and again, one of which was commanded to Adam, we basically, the Jewish people, so to speak, the children of Israel in Egypt, are not very distinct from Noahides. In other words, we have a couple more commandments than they do, but other than that, we're pretty much the same as everybody else. And already now, as God is taking us out, he's beginning to make us more and more distinct. He loads upon us, as we're leaving Egypt, a whole bunch of new commandments that are totally unique to the nation of Israel and no other nation has or will have. And those are among the commandments that I enumerated, and the Torah is very strict about non-Israelite not participating in the Paschal sacrifice. If there's time, we'll go into that a little bit, because I wanted to, if there's time, talk a little bit about something that gets my goat, no pun intended, because we're talking about the Paschal sacrifice, and which was a lamb or a goat. What gets my goat is you have these, really, I could do such an eye roll. These pundits on YouTube who claim to be teachers of TaNaCh, or teachers of Torah, or teachers of Judaism, or whatever they want to claim, and they're from outer space, and they say things that are totally unfounded. And among them, that's one gets bandied about so much, it drives me crazy. And I don't want to offend anybody, but I know I'm going to ruffle feathers, because so many people hold false beliefs. They just don't read the Torah. Is that there's no difference in the law between a Jew and a non-Jew. The covenant is for everyone. And they love to quote right out of context, right? Everybody's favorite thing to do, that the stranger and the Israelite shall have one Torah, one law for the stranger and the Israelite. There's one law for everybody. Sounds good, right? Sounds good. Yeah, except if you read the verses that come right before it, then you don't know what you're talking about. Because I was going to talk about this a little later, but in chapter 12, when it talks about the laws of a Paschal lamb, it says that the ben nechar may not eat of it, the son of the foreigner may not eat of it. Well, who is that? It says the uncircumcised may not eat of it. It says a toshav, which means a resident, may not eat of it. A sachir, which means a hired worker, may not eat of it. And then it says the Israelites must eat it. And then it says, and the stranger shall have one law with the Israelite and eat it. So the stranger is clearly not everybody who's not an Israelite, because it already said the son of the foreigner may not, the resident may not, the hired laborer may not, the uncircumcised may not. So don't tell me it's only the uncircumcised, and as soon as you circumcise, you can go ahead and do it, because it listed all these other people. Well, who are these people? If everybody has the same law, why is the Torah specifically in the same section where it says the stranger and the Israelite shall have one law, says, but all these other guys, no. Now, obviously, not everybody's included in that term of ger, right? We have a whole bunch of other people. So there's a very clear delineation in the Torah between Israelite and non-Israelite. What the stranger is, some of you know, some of you may not know. Just to spoil everybody, a stranger is what we call today a convert, someone from a not natural-born Israelite who joins the nation of Israel through a conversion process. It's called a ger, and he has one law with the Israelite because, for all intents and purposes, he becomes an Israelite. But if you don't do that, you're not. And the Torah in the very same section is very clear about this. So why people love to quote things out of context and create their own religions, I don't know, but it drives me crazy. Anyway, that's enough of my rant. But here it's very clear in this Parsha that God is creating a distinct nation, because the Israelites are, even before Sinai, are already given a bunch of distinct and unique laws. Something is changing in the world, something that I don't think people appreciate this point, something that never happened before, that essentially until this point, the Israelites were basically also B'nai Noach. They were Noahides with a couple of distinctions, one or two. And And they happened to have a common ancestor, just like the Edomites and the Amalekites and the Egyptian. You have a nationality, a national identity, and ethnicity, but under the law, you were not unique. Nobody was super unique. But here, the uniqueness really begins to come to the fore. I'm taking you out of Egypt, and I'm not just separating you, like they're going to be over there and you're going to be over here. You're going to be something new and distinct in the world that never existed before, and there never will be another nation like you. I have a special plan for you, and here's where it begins. And so we really need to hunker down and understand what is the purpose and what is the uniqueness of this new creation, this new nation with its unique set of laws and its unique covenant. What is it for? What is it meant to accomplish? Now, also in next week's Parsha, which is called Bashalach, they're going to come to a place in the desert called Marah, which means bitterness. And that's where the bitter waters are. And it's a whole other story, but it says there, Sham Sam Lo Chok Umishpat V'Sham Nisahu. There God gave them statutes and judgments. And also the Sabbath is commanded there as well. So we know that the Jews will receive the commandments of Sabbath. Some of the statutes, the chukim, we spoke about in my first class on this channel, bechukotai, the, so to speak, laws that defy explanation. We're to understand that this is a reference to the laws of the red heifer were given in Marah, and in Mishpat, some of the civil laws between man and man were given at this place. So even as we head towards Sinai, we're going through a transformational process where we're getting some more commandments and then some more commandments until finally at Sinai, everything's going to be sealed. Now, what's the purpose of doing it in stages? Well, I think here to demarcate, I'm taking you out of Egypt for a purpose. So I want to begin you already on that road. So you see, there's a purpose to this. It's not just willy-nilly. It's not just, I felt bad for you. You were slaves. Now you're free and, go run into the world and do whatever you want. It's like there's something very purposeful happening over here. And these commandments that we're getting at this stage are pointing in that direction. And even as we go to Sinai, there's a process. I believe that's the idea of a person's spiritual journey of growth. You can't emerge fully formed as a perfect, righteous individual who's wholly, solely, and every fiber of their being is dedicated to God. Every person needs to go through a journey and a transformation. That's true for Jews and it's true for Bnei Noach. So even that model is demonstrated with this process in the Torah. But be that as it may, okay, so what is going on here? What is the nature of this transformation? What is the nature of this mission? So here I want to direct you to the comments of Ramban, the medieval scholar who's known as Nachmanides. Ramban in Hebrew is an acronym for Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. Rabbi Moses, the son of Nachman, also known as Nachmanides, not to be confused with Rambam, with an M at the end. Rabbi Moses, the son of Maimon, known as Maimonides. Nachmanides was a little bit later than Maimonides. And he, at the end of this Parsha, on the very last verse of Parsha's Bo, he writes a philosophical piece in his commentary that's so fundamental that certainly every Jew should read it. And I think every Ben Noach should read it. Ramban's commentary is available both from Art Scroll. Oh, by the way, if you wanna do me a toiva, as we say in Hebrew, if you want to do something nice for me, you can go to artscroll.com/Rebbe Rafi, which is spelled REBBI, which is my affiliate link for Art Scroll. And if you purchase items on their website, when you navigate to it with that link, artscroll.com/Rebbe Rafi, REBBI, a portion of the purchase will come my way, and that helps me out to continue doing what I do. So if you want to do that, so I'll just recommend now, you can buy the Ramban's commentary, Ramban, Ramban's commentary on the Torah which was published by Art Scroll in English, and it's a beautiful work, and I highly recommend it. There's an older edition from another publisher. I don't know the publisher, which is totally English, there's no Hebrew. This one is like has the Hebrew text, has the English text. Nicely done. Anyway, he writes over here what the purpose essentially of the exile, of the Exodus was, and what the purpose in general of the commandments are. The commandments that are, so to speak, specific to Israel. And he makes the following, he draws the following picture. He says, once upon a time, God created the world. Everybody knew about God. There was no questions about God. It was knowledge of God was pretty firm. Over the generations, the knowledge of God was forgotten. People began heresies and idolatries until the point we reach in the Exodus when people didn't know about Hashem anymore. It was sort of like the well-kept secret of the Abrahamic family at this point. And so, Pharaoh, when Moses and Aaron come to Pharaoh, they say, who's Hashem that I should listen to him? I never heard of this Hashem before. So Hashem has to make himself known. Now, among the heresies that Ramban talks about that have entered the world, we're familiar with all of them. He says, number one is the heresy that there is no God. There is no God. There is no creator. Now, in the Ramban's time, the idea of how do you have a world without a creator was the world is eternal. The world always existed. And since it always existed, it did not require a creator. That's the idea. It's sort of just timeless, eternal, an eternal universe. That has been debunked by science today, meaning even science today has caught up with the Torah and said, no, actually the world had a beginning. They call it the Big Bang, and they have a very big problem to understand what got everything rolling, meaning now that there was a beginning, so there's a beginning point, there's a point of creation, so how did that ball get rolling, right? Before you had the idea of a rolling ball, or you could say the ball was always rolling, so the ball was always rolling. But if the ball started rolling, how did it start rolling? Who started it rolling? Where did the ball come from? Etc. So there really is no answer in the scientific community for this. It's really a mystery that remains. There have been those who have attempted to explain how the universe could arise spontaneously. My Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Moshe Meiselman, he wrote a book that is not published by Art Scroll. I think it's published by Israel Bookshop. He wrote a book, a number of books, but more recently he wrote a book called Torah, Chazal, and Science. Chazal is spelled Chazal, and it's a Hebrew acronym for our sages of blessed memory. So Torah, Chazal, meaning our sages of blessed memory, and Science. And it's a book that explores the many topics of the supposed conflicts between the Torah, the works of the sages, and modern science. And he deals with these conflicts in a very erudite, scholarly way. The book's over 800 pages long. Yes, I read it. And I recommend it. And I'm not endorsing every view that he puts forward in the book, but it's a lot of food for thought and a lot of great information. So he points out in the book that, we have a right to be skeptical of science. I think after the whole COVID controversy, I don't want to go there so much, but I think we have today a lot of right to be skeptical of science, especially when the facts keep changing, and you have whoever, I don't want to get political, saying the science changed, the science changed, the science changed. And that is a very honest statement. And it's true. Science continues to change because we continue to learn and continue to correct our mistakes. And as we go forward, we learn things about the reality of the world we didn't know before, and the things we thought before that explained the data that we had are now longer sufficient to explain the new data that we have. So new theories need to be formed, and new explanations, and this is a process that's been going on forever. So I'm not against science. I love science, and I think that it's extremely helpful in improving our lives, and has been so. However, it's not gospel. Excuse me. I hope that's not a trigger word. So we say we don't Jews, we don't say it's not gospel. I know it's an English expression. We say it's not Torah mi Sinai. This is not the Torah from Sinai. That's how Jews say, what the equivalent phrase of it's not gospel is. It's not Torah. It's not the Torah from Sinai. What's the Torah from Sinai is immutable. That's divine knowledge, cannot be wrong, and it cannot change. Science is not Torah mi Sinai. It's not Torah from Sinai. But there are those who have put forward some theories about how a universe could arise on its own. Oh, this is Rabbi Meisman. I was going to say, he points out this contradiction that at one time you have a science which declares with all its might, life doesn't arise from nothingness. It's what's called spontaneous generation. Like people used to believe that, out of rotting meat came, worms and flies and whatever, that it actually grew out of the meat. Now we know that, these microscopic organisms are coming and they're laying eggs, and, we're just not seeing that happen because the eggs are microscopic, but it's coming externally, right? So what they used to believe, spontaneous generation, that life arose out of nothing, has been totally disproven by scientists like Louis Pasteur. So he says, on the one hand, say there is no such thing as spontaneous generation. And then you say, so where did life begin? They say it came about on its own. He said, you told me there's no spontaneous generation. Now you're telling me there is spontaneous generation. Which one is true, right? He points this out. There's also there's no something from nothing. Okay, so where did the universe come from? So there is some attempt to explain this. It's a big tangent. Lawrence Krauss talks about this is so amazing though. Quantum physics is so amazing, and the way it lines up with Kabbalah and Jewish oral tradition and mysticism is stunning, absolutely stunning. I'll give you an example. They talk about the four forces. There's four, I don't know what they call them in science. I don't have the vocabulary on the top of my head, but like primordial forces that predate the universe. There's the electromagnetic force. There's the strong. There's what is it? Electromagnetic. Is it gravity? The strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force, something like that. I may be getting it wrong. I didn't prepare this before. But there's four forces. That's exactly what we say. That, so to speak, the four-letter name of God, of each of the four letters, is representative of a spiritual force. And they say, there were these four. The four forces are eternal. They say there was no matter, there was no physical universe, but there were these four forces, these fields of energy, and there were the interactions between the fields of energy produced particles and so on and so forth, and eventually you have enough particles to make a universe. But what's interesting is we also say the exact same thing, that God, who's represented in these four letters, which Kabbalistically represent four forces, which again emerge from a unified source. It's another story for another time. It's not a Kabbalah class. The interactions between and the permutations of these letters, which again are spiritual forces, brought into being all of creation. They say now that there's 17 subatomic particles, right? They were able to examine the universe down to its smallest particles, and they said there's 17 basic particles that make up everything in the universe. It's made up of 17 tiny little subatomic particles that we've never seen them. They're only theoretical. It's just that their existence explains what we observe. So they've theorized the existence of these 17. Again, I'm saying subatomic particles. I don't know if that's the right terminology, that underlie all of creation. And I'm thinking, what's the significance of the number 17? Well, the number 17 in Hebrew is the word tov, which means good. Now, this is a famous idea that tov is 17. So suddenly, when the scientists start saying 17, immediately my mind goes, tov. The Hebrew word tov has a numerical value of 17. And what word appears all over the creation story? Tov, tov, tov. God saw it was good. God saw it was good. God saw it was good. It was tov. It was tov. It was tov. The number 17 is all over creation. So this stuff doesn't bother me, but it's funny that what's his name? There was an astronomer named Jastrow. I forget his first name, and he made this famous statement where he said scientists have been climbing the mountain of truth for millennia, And it feels like when we finally get up to the precipice at the very top of this mountain, we're going to pull ourselves over the top and find that there's a group of theologians already seated there, right? A group of theologians already seated there. Where science is coming closer and closer to God. So when we get to the top of the mountain of truth, we're going to say, oh, you know, the believers had it right all along. Anyway, so there's this idea, and there's a heresy that the world has no creator. It either was timeless, or today you have Lawrence Krauss with his, you know, 4 eternal forces, which, like I said, I don't object to that. He's an avowed atheist himself. There's another heresy that, yes, there's a creator. We admit that there's a creator, but this creator has no knowledge of the universe. The universe is sort of just like an outgrowth of his existence, but he's not aware of it. And the reason he's not aware of it, this was like Aristotle's view, is because God would need to be perfect, and what's perfect cannot change, and the universe changes. There are changes happening in the universe, which means God's knowledge of the universe would have to change, which means that God's not perfect, because perfection doesn't change. So God cannot have knowledge of the universe. So if there's a God, he's not aware of the universe. That's another heresy. Now, of course, there's a rebuttal to this, which is the changes happen over time. And this is the Jewish rebuttal. The changes happen over time. So there's only a change for a being who's bound by time. And as moments pass and things change from moment to moment, so the knowledge of those things change. But when you have a being who creates time and stands outside of time, so to speak, and time is a creation, then that being has simultaneous knowledge of all time and all things that happen always, from the beginning till the end of time. So there's no change in their knowledge. Their knowledge remains constant always. So our position on God, it remains perfect. But that's another heresy. There is a creator, but he's not aware. The third heresy that the Ramban talks about is the idea that God is aware, but he's impotent. He doesn't have power to act. So because otherwise it explains the problem. We have a problem with evil. Why is evil allowed to occur in the world? So Harold Kushner, who is not an Orthodox rabbi, but Harold Kushner was some kind of a quote-unquote rabbi, put in air quotes, who wrote a famous book called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People, where he puts forward an explanation for the problem of evil by saying God can't stop evil. That's his premise. There's a big heresy put forward, sadly, by a person calling himself a rabbi. But even the Ramban mentions this as one of the heretical beliefs of yore. And a variant on this is not that God cannot act, but he's not interested in acting, which is also, it's a variant of the same problem of evil, is that either God cannot be good, otherwise he would stop the evil, or he cannot be powerful, otherwise he would stop the evil, right? If he was good and there's evil, then he doesn't have the power to stop the evil. If he has the power to stop the evil and there's evil, it must be because he's not good, because he's not stopping the evil. Again, the Jewish classical resolution to this is, so to speak, we don't understand God's ways. We don't necessarily see the big picture to know what's good and not good, but we trust that even what we perceive to be bad has an ultimate good purpose. That's a whole other class. But these are the three heresies. There is no creator, or there is a creator and he's not aware of the universe, or he's not aware of changes in the universe, or he's aware but he cannot or is uninterested in acting. These are basically all the ingredients for all the heresies you could possibly concoct on earth to negate belief in God. And so at the event of the Exodus of Egypt, God was setting the record straight. He was putting to bed all of these heresies. He says, you don't think there's a God? Here I am. And he presented the greatest miracles that the world has ever seen, where there was no doubt that there was not just a supernatural force at work, but a supernatural force who had full and absolute control of everything in nature from the bottom to the top, and could only be the master of these powers, and therefore its creator and originator, the total and full master of the universe itself. Now, we mentioned bow before, and it's a little bit of a tangent. It's not a total tangent, but it may be just because of the time constraint, but I feel it's worthwhile to say. Some of our commentaries talk about the breakdown of the 10 plagues. So here's where we're doing catch up from last week. Okay, this is very important, very deep, very powerful. You never thought about this before, and it's so profound. And once you hear it, you can never unhear it. You ready for this? If you pay careful attention to the text, this week's Parsha begins with the word bow. Why? Because the verse says, Bo el Paro. God says to Moshe, Bo el Paro. The word bow in Hebrew means come. Come to Pharaoh. You're going to come to Pharaoh and you're going to warn him about the plague of locusts. Okay? So, come to Pharaoh. How many times does God tell Moshe, come to Pharaoh? 3 times. Only in 3 of the plagues out of 10 does God say to Moshe, come to Pharaoh. However, we know Moshe offers warnings to Pharaoh more than 3 times. So what words does God use the other times? Well, other times God says to Moshe, Lech el Paro. Go. Lech means go. Bo means come. Lech means go. Go to Pharaoh. And I bet you never noticed this before, but Moshe doesn't always warn Pharaoh first. 3 times Moshe warns Pharaoh when God says, Lech, go to Pharaoh and warn him. He goes to Pharaoh. 3 times he goes to Pharaoh. 3 times God says, Bo, come to Pharaoh and warn him. To talk about the difference between these two. And three times he gives no warning. He gives no warning. And the final time, the plague of the firstborn, there's neither a go nor a come, and there is a warning because he warns them about the plague of the firstborn when he's already warning him about the plague of must be the plague of locusts, if I'm not mistaken. So here is the pattern. Ready? I told you there's 3 and 3 and 3. 3 goes, 3 comes, and 3 no warnings. And here's how it goes. You ready? The first plague of blood, God says, go to Pharaoh. The second plague of frogs, God says, come to Pharaoh. The third plague, there's no warning. The lice. The fourth plague, Arov, which according to Jewish tradition is wild animals. And I know some of you are thinking, what do you mean according to Jewish tradition? Doesn't everybody believe they're animals? And someone else who's listening to me is thinking, wild animals? I never heard of that before. I thought it was flies. And someone else is thinking, flies? I never heard of flies before. So according to Jewish tradition, Arov, which literally means like mixture, means a mixed multitude of wild animals. Where does there are translations? I think the King James is flies. Where does that come from? Is a question for another topic, another time. I don't have time, but I'm going to go with the traditional Jewish view, which is wild animals. Wild animals. God says, go to Pharaoh. The next plague is the plague of pestilence. He says, come to Pharaoh. For the plague of boils, there's no warning. For the plague of hail, God says, go to Pharaoh. For the plague of locusts, God says, come to Pharaoh. And for the plague of darkness, there is no warning. Okay, and the warning for the plague of the firstborn was given when he was standing in front of Pharaoh during one of the other plagues. I forgot, but we'll leave that aside for now. So again, here's the pattern. Go, come, no warning. Go, come, no warning. Go, come, no warning. I bet you never noticed that before. But now you'll never unnotice it before. Now, what does each one mean? Go is when you're standing from far away, you say, go. Go over there. When you're standing close, you say, come over here. Right? Because I'm already here. In other words, God's telling Moshe, go over there. Okay. Then God's telling Moshe, come over here. I'm here now. I'm here by Pharaoh. Come. And the third time, there's no warning because you've arrived at your destination. You're far, you're close, you've arrived. Second set, Go, come, no warning. Far, close, arrived. Third set. Go, come, no warning. Far, close, arrived. What are these three groupings? The three groupings are water, or I should say bottom, middle, top. Watch. The first plague is blood. Blood is in the river. It's below land, right? Water is below land, otherwise there'll be a flood. So it's at the bottom. And it's distant from where people live. The river is not where people live. So you have blood is distant and it's low. Then comes frogs. The frogs come out of the river onto the land and come into the place where the people are. So it goes from far to close, and it's going from lower to higher. Next comes the lice. It's the land itself. The land itself turns into lice and goes all over their bodies. Now it's on them. It went from far to close to contact, right? Far, close, contact. Then comes wild animals. Wild animals are coming from far. They're coming from the jungles of Africa. They're coming out, the wild animals from far. Let's go to Pharaoh. Then come, we're close. The pestilence affects the animals in the Egyptians' immediate vicinity, their local domesticated animals. And then there's the boils right on their skin, contact. But it's getting higher, right? Because we went from the lice on the ground to the animals above the ground to the pestilence, which was affected also the animals on the ground, but was kind of like an airborne disease. And then, bam, it's on their bodies, standing upright on the earth. It's getting closer. It's getting higher. Then the third set, go, come, contact. We have the hail coming from the high in the sky, coming from, whatever was meteorites from outer space. Woo! Now it's high, right? And then you have the locusts coming from closer. And then finally you have the darkness which was all around them, surrounding them. And according to the text, if you read it closely, where it says, Vayamesh choshech, I don't even know how to translate that unless you translate the way I'm going to do it now. Vayamesh choshech. The darkness was mush. Mush means that it was tangible. The darkness was physical. The darkness was thick. That according to our sources, the first 3 days of darkness was like pitch black. And the second 3 days of darkness was paralysis. The darkness thickened that they couldn't even see or move through the air. It was like a thick force field. So there was no movement. So that was contact. So these three sets of go, come, no warning is like far, close, contact, right? Okay, which is why there's no warning, because it's already there. It's already arrived. Boom, punch in the face, right? And finally, the plague of the firstborn was sort of in its own category, something spiritual and above everything. So why am I telling you this? So here you have miracles on the level that you've never seen before, that clearly not only have a supernatural character emanating from a supernatural source, but this source is unified, and this source is the creator and master of all these things. So the revelation of God as the one true creator and master of everything was totally revealed through the 10 plagues. And it's not a coincidence that the 10 plagues correspond to the 10 utterances of creation. I don't think that Christians are familiar with this, so people who don't have a Jewish background in study may not know this, but our sages teach that the world was created in 10 utterances. God said, let there be. God said, let there be. God said, let there be, and there was. That if we count the 10 utterances, the 10 speakings of creation, or rather, if we count the speakings of creation, we'll find that the world was brought into being with 10 divine utterances. And here God's revelation of himself as creator is again with 10 acts, each act corresponding to one of the utterances of creation, because it's, so to speak, deconstructed a different layer of the fabric of reality. And of course, no coincidence, the 10 commandments, which uphold the fabric of reality. And that's all for another time. But this was the revelation. this was what was going on over here. And God said, now that I've revealed it, but it's more than that. It's more than that. I exist. But watch how I favor this nation. Watch how everything that's happening is coinciding, is conspiring to favor this nation. There's clearly not just that I'm a creator, but there's a purpose to this creation. And the purpose revolves around this nation. And again, if we go back to my class on Genesis about God's focus in creation is the righteous and justice for the righteous, reward for the righteous. So you have to go back to that class for that. But here it's coming into play. That was in the beginning of creation, Genesis, so to speak, the beginning of creation. I don't remember if we spoke about it in Genesis or Lech Lecha, Bereshis or Lech Lecha, but one of those classes. Anyway, but here, like I said, was the world created in Tishrei? Was the world created in Nisan? Was it created at the time of Rosh Hashanah? Was it created at the time of Passover? Yes, the world came into being at Rosh Hashanah, but nobody remembered. But at Passover, all that knowledge of creation, boom, explodes onto the world scene. Now we know there's a creator. Now we know the purpose of creation is that God is righteous and just. He does care. He does know. He knows the Jews were slaves in Egypt. He has an awareness. He has a knowledge, and he can act. He has power, and he's good. He wants justice for the oppressed. He uplifts the slave and he carries him to freedom. And these are righteous people, the children of righteous people that God had a relationship with. God is saying, I want a relationship with you. I want a relationship with humankind, and that relationship revolves around righteous and just behavior. All the knowledge that anyone needed about God was happening at this time. And because this was the nation he was using to demonstrate it, for all the reason of establishing the relationship with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all those previous parshios, he said, now this is the nation that has to carry this message forward forever. This can't be a nation just like the other nations. It's not just here, go free and now blend in with the community of nations, because someone has to carry this message forward. And that's why he begins with commandments. He says, I'm setting you aside, and all these commandments are going to point to this. Every year you're going to have a festival of 7 days that parallels the 7 days of creation. And also these 7 days, you're not going to have unleavened bread, because you're going to remember the haste with which you left Egypt and that the bread didn't rise. These events of Egypt have to be remembered forever because they carry the knowledge of God. You're going to bind these words to your arm and to your head, the arm opposite the heart, on the head between the eyes, because you have to make this knowledge ever present in your eyes, in your mind, in your heart. It has to conduct your actions. And in those leather boxes, the tefillin, the phylacteries, we have scrolls that declare Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, Hashem is our God, Hashem is one. And it pronounces the idea of reward and punishment, that God is interested in righteousness on earth, and righteousness will be requited with a positive consequence, and wickedness will be requited with a negative consequence. We put a mezuzah on our door with the same thing when we go in and when we come out. You're going to, again, the redeeming of the firstborn, which is going to be a remembrance of this. And so many of the commandments, when we make the declaration of Kiddush Friday nights, when we bring in the Sabbath and we take a cup of wine and we make a blessing, which is fulfilling a divine command to remember the Sabbath day. We make a declaration about the nature of the Sabbath. We say in that declaration, in that blessing, this is a remembrance to the creation of the world and a remembrance to the Exodus of Egypt, because the Exodus is that event that brings this knowledge to the world. The knowledge of the creation comes out from this Exodus, comes out from this nation. So I'm running out of time, so I basically hope I've gotten the main idea across, that what was the centrality of these events and why were the commandments already begun to be given here? What was the transformation that it was meant to bring about in this people, and why these people, and why we have to keep it for all generations, as you know, because you are my witnesses, declares Hashem. We, the Jewish people, by keeping this distinctness with these commandments that are all arrows pointing back to the Exodus. Remember that time when God revealed himself in such an open and irrefutable way that he's the creator, he is the master, he has a purpose, he has the power, he is benevolent, he is merciful. He punishes the wicked, and he raises up the downtrodden, and he rewards the righteous. That message has to be carried forward by the children of Israel forever. And that's why it's specifically us and not any other nation. If other nations would start performing the commandments, they suddenly become meaningless. And so, well, why are you doing that? Well, it's a neat thing I saw in the Torah, or I saw the Jews do it. If our purpose is to be the witnesses because we were there and because it all started with us, and we keep doing it and passing it down to our children from generation to generation in an unbroken chain. So when a person sees a Jew today, he knows there's a God who created the universe and took us out of Egypt back then, which was the declaration of this creation. It only works if the witnesses are the ones doing it. If everybody's doing it, then nobody's a witness anymore, because what makes you distinct from him? The Jewish people have to remain distinct in the way that they are the ones performing these commandments, because they're the ones who went through it. That's the point. By us doing the commandments uniquely and distinctly, we are the ones who stands as a witness to God. But what are we witnessing to? Everything I spoke about. So what's the point of witnessing? That everyone else should know. So the rest of the world, and for any B'nai Noach who are watching, your purpose is to receive the message. Your purpose is to get the message. Your purpose is to recognize, I look at the Jews, and through the Jews, I see that there is a God. I see that there is a creator. I see there's a purpose to the world. I see that he's aware of us. I see that he cares of us. I see he cares what I do. I'm going to live righteously. I'm going to have a relationship with him. God is interested in me. He's interested in having a relationship with me. And you live as a righteous Ben Noach, as you're supposed to. The Ramban goes so far as to talk about people congregating in prayer and declaring God together. I've heard people say Noahites shouldn't create their own communities or shouldn't congregate. I don't think there's any basis to that whatsoever. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. It seems clear from this Ramban. He cites Jonah and Nineveh, how the people of Nineveh, they were not Jewish. They got together. They called out to God, as this was the purpose of Jonah's coming. This was the purpose of the Jewish people. Jonah's like many Jewish people coming to Nineveh. That's the Jews coming to the world and saying, hey guys, there's a God. What you do matters. You're supposed to recognize, and you're supposed to turn to God and serve him. Let me see if there was any other points I wanted to hit. Okay, there's a little bit more, but we're past the hour. So I'm going to essentially leave it there.
Okay.
But just again, to see the big picture of what was the Exodus all about. It was the reversal, says the Ramban, the reversal and the negation and the refutation of all the heresies that existed and can exist vis-a-vis the existence of God, the nature of God, the purpose of the creation. The Exodus revealed it all. That God exists, that he's the creator, that he's all-powerful, that he's only one, that he created the world purposefully, that he wants us to be righteous, and we, the Jewish people who he used to demonstrate that, become the witness people forever to the world. We do so by fulfilling these commandments that point back to the Exodus. We do this in an unbroken chain. I'm just going to tell you a little story, and then I'll stop. Every year, I come to the Passover Seder. Passover night, we reenact Jews everywhere in the world. Practically every Jewish home, even if you're not Orthodox. You walk in Passover night, and the family will be gathered around the table with their matzahs, reenacting the events that the Jews did in their homes on the night of the plague of the firstborn, which was the night before the emerging from Egypt, doing the rituals and the ceremonies that God commanded, with the absence of the Paschal offering, because we don't have a temple. But aside from that, which we substitute anyway for that, we are reenacting those things. I presently every year lead my family Seder. As a child, I sat at my father's Seder. My father sat at his father's Seder. And I have in my possession, I wish I would have brought it, I could hold it up to the camera, a Haggadah. We use these books on the Seder night, the Haggadahs. They're like little handbooks, that the guidebooks of what text we're supposed to say and what rituals we're supposed to do. And, you just follow the prompts in this book from the first page to the last page. You get through the whole ceremony. It's called the Haggadah. I have the Haggadah that my father used when he was a child in my grandfather's home. And in the Haggadah is written the notes that probably my grandmother wrote in there of all the family members, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, everybody who was old enough to be at that table at that time, and who recites what part of the text, and who's in charge of doing this little ritual and who's in charge of doing that ritual. When I open my Haggadah, it's a window 2 generations back to exactly what my family was doing. And doubtlessly, they were doing what they had done before them. And if you go into every Jewish home everywhere, and they're doing the exact same thing because their parents did it, because their parents did it, because their grandparents did it. And eventually you get back to this nation that did it the first time. The Seder night is like the greatest testimony I've always felt of the truth of these events, because every Jew in every home is doing it the same way his grandfather did it, all the way back to the beginning. And it's only significant because we, the people who were there, were the ones who did it, which is why the Torah is so strict about no one else doing it. This is one of the most blatant chapters. Look at chapter 12 in Exodus, where God's like, only Jews allowed to do this. Nobody else allowed to do this. And the ger, which is obviously the convert in this context. So, because he's joining the nations, becoming part of the nation. So this is what emerges from the Exodus, from the miracles of the Exodus, from the 10 plagues and so on. This is why the commandments nationally to the Jewish people really begin here and are the root of all the commandments. There's more that we don't have time to go to, but again, we become the witness nation. We go forward from generation to generation, preserving these commandments and being the beacon and the witnesses to the world. Hey guys, there's a God. He's real. We were there. It happened, and we're still here. Please recognize him. Please turn to him. Please build a relationship with him. Please serve him, because this is the purpose for which the world was created. So I hope you were able to gain something from that.
Yes.
I also got off my chest the whole thing about, the people who like to conflate that Jews and non-Jews are equal in the Torah, which is, again, when I say equal, I'm not saying one's better or worse, but that they are legally bound in the same requirements. It is totally and absolutely false. I hope that point was brought out clearly in this class, but it doesn't mean we all have don't have all the same goal. We do have all the same goal, and that's to recognize and build a relationship with Hashem. So with whatever you got out of the class in this hour, I hope you're able to enhance your relationship with Hashem and go forward strongly and righteously serving Hashem together, Israel, together with the Ben Noach, and everyone should have a wonderful week.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rabbi. Your packages are always well packed. Thank you for that very much. So we'll see you, Hashem willing, same time, same place next week. And I'll see, I'm pretty sure that we've got, since we've been doing the Torah Parsha for quite a few years, I've got copies. So moving forward, if we do have a week we can't record for whatever reason, and sometimes we don't realize until it's the last minute, I'll see about getting another Parsha up that has been done from the studio from the year or two before. So that way you don't have just an empty slate for Shabbat. So thank you, Rabbi, and we'll talk to you soon. You have a wonderful week. Take care, everybody. Peace.
Shalom, my dear friends. Hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going, and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNachTalk.com, TANACHTALK.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.
ויתור זו הגדולה השאיפה